Hey, everybody, welcome back to Conversations in Ken's Cafe. We got Adam back with us, growing in the desert. It's amazing that people can actually, move into the desert because you're not that far from Death Valley and grow there. Explain to people how you're able to do it, Adam.
Yeah, it's with a lot of just drive, passion for wanting to make sure my results happen. Really, just working my butt off and making sure that, and it's just experience, learning and failing
Mhm.
constantly and being comfortable with failure because you definitely are. If you try to grow a tomato plant in the ground and it says full sun, and you're like, well, it says full sun, so it should be fine. And then you put it in here in the desert, and all of a sudden the thing's roasting and not making any fruits for you and you're like, okay, well, what's going on? It says full sun. You have to figure out what to do. Maybe add a shade cloth. Maybe they don't mean full sun as far as like the desert sun goes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
understand the temperatures, things like that. And being able to try to keep the plants cool. Majorly their root system nice and cool. Understand that when you're growing out here in the desert too, in the soil where there's no like moisture. I mean, we're in the driest of the nation like area. So
Yeah.
it's the Mojave Desert is no joke, and so understanding and how to be able to make sure that you can retain moisture using things like mulch and other type of techniques, drip lines and all that too. Being able to give a steady flow of water to the roots to be able to keep them cool during high temperatures is very important as well, and everything too. And so a lot of techniques, a lot of stuff goes into it, but there's not a lot of stuff written about it. So a lot of trial and error is really the key.
Yeah. Well,
Part of it.
maintaining
So
moisture is one of the primal things that we have to do because every cell needs a certain amount of moisture to be able to actually divide that cell. Same with the biology needs its own moisture in its body. So
that's right.
maintaining that, like now you mentioned shade cloth. I know you have a large hoop house that you're growing in year round. In the desert, does that really, overheat things? Like, how do you compensate for, having the plastic that's drawing extra heat in?
Yeah, we had to put a fan inside there. I had like a little thing called an evaporative cooler that was inside there and it was
Yep.
working. And then my pump went bad, and so I had to switch out and try to find the pump. Turns out I couldn't find the exact model, so I had to like jerry rig it inside there, a new pump, cut off like it was for a 120-volt outlet. I cut that and I put it in and rewired it to the old pump's wiring, so then I could use that switch still. But it wasn't drawn enough like electricity and stuff because I guess the pump was made for a higher voltage and stuff. So right now I just have a fan in there and I'm just blowing it constantly, trying to have it keep cool. Also, the sides of my hot tunnel rise system, so the hoop house, they roll up. So we roll up the sides as much as we can. But too much would also make it to when the wind starts blowing, then the wind comes right through and it hits your plants and stuff. And they could be all fruit and full of, peppers and tomatoes and whatever else, even with
Yeah.
the hemp, flowers and stuff coming out. And they could just knock them right over, snap them in half. And then all of a sudden you have to go over there and start figuring out what to do and how to, tie them up and put stakes in the ground and all that stuff, but we try to make it to where we could, more preventative. So we're trying to make sure we do the stakes before and all that stuff. But this year, with another additive to my family, I wasn't able to do as much as what I had
Yep.
planned to do this year. But just writing it down and making sure that we do this stuff at the right time and stuff next year. Maybe things will be a little bit more comfortable during then, and I'll be able to have the more time perhaps to be able to start preventatively, doing stuff. But right now, it's just taking care of the problems as they come.
Well, exactly. And Lily wanted to point out, aren't deserts hot during the day and then cool at night?
Well, yeah, it's a desert, and it doesn't just mean that we're dealing with triple digits all the time. Deserts are extreme temperature conditions. So even in the wintertime, we do get below freezing, and it could just get cold just enough to wipe out your whole crops of your tomatoes and your peppers and everything. And during the wintertime, the wind does blow a lot. Even if I have the sides rolled down and the doors closed, we still get plenty of wind that comes through there, cold wind that will frostbite everything and then just start killing or just slowly tormenting these plants and making it to where like it's hard to grow all year round in that high tunnel there because of that. It's a lot of space, and so not only are we dealing with the triple digit heats, but we're also trying to deal with below freezing temperatures and like temperatures that tomatoes and peppers cannot survive in. So
well, and people understand that or don't understand so much about dew point. Do you guys look at the dew point that's happening as the day turns to night and the night turns to day? Are you trying to collect any of the water off of that dew point?
Oh, I would love to do that if we had dew, but honestly, I have my thermometer all set up, and we get maybe like 5% more at night. Like right now, we're sitting here at about a 10% moisture. So 10%, right. That's really low, and that's like, like other places they don't get that low. And so like at night, early morning before the sun comes up, we get to maybe 15, if you're lucky, 20. But that's still not enough for moisture to actually start condensating or any sort of moisture at all. So I've never at any sort of time of the day ever went outside and saw little, crystally dew points, appearing on the grass or appearing on the plants or anything like that. So we really have to focus on being able to add moisture during those times. One of the things that we want to be able to try to do is get our system more automated. So then we are watering at those times, those early mornings, and having the system start going off and be able to water at that time. So then it kind of makes it artificial dew point, but we'll be able to water less because the temperatures are cooler and there's more moisture in the air. So then we could actually make it to where, we don't have to put the water on as long. So taking advantage of those temperatures are important. Yes.
Yeah. Now you were also mentioning you have an evaporative cooler. Now, for anybody that doesn't understand what an evaporative cooler is, can you explain it? Just a quick explanation.
Yeah, sure. So pretty much what an evaporative cooler is, it's just like a fan with some sort of material, such as like cardboard or aspen wood is the most common thing. And what happens is you have a pump that will pump water into that material, and then it'll make this like kind of barrier of water that's kind of trickled down, and then a fan in the middle that will be sucking through that trickle of water, and then through the concept of the air hitting through the water will actually cool the temperatures by a good 20 degrees or so, and also increase the humidity and stuff in there too as well. So that's a cool concept. My shop that I'm in right now is actually ran off of evaporative cooler, and right now it's 10% humidity outside, but it's 56% in humidity inside. So that increased that humidity a lot, but we're still, we're at 111 degrees, 111.6 right now outside, and then in the shop right now it's 81.5. So again, it's that 20-degree difference right there, but also the humidity is a lot higher. And so that kind of helps to cool things down that way too. But if you start going into monsoon season, which we do have occasionally, this year not so much. We had it a little bit earlier in June or so. That's when we get moisture out from Arizona, and it's brought in from like the southwest or southeast actually, and then it comes over here. And it'll bring in some moisture, and then that will mess up your whole evaporative cooler system. So I can't even really go in the shop, during that time when that moisture is coming in. And that's when we just get like freak storms. And that's when flash flood season happens and all that stuff too. I want to start developing more systems to be able to harness that type of stuff. But just this past year, we really hadn't had much rain. We had one moment of rain, no flash floods, which we usually always have some sort of like flash flood warning or something like that going on. But we maybe had one warning about it, but it wasn't in our area at all. It was more closer towards town and stuff. But being able to take advantage of those, even just like a good hit of rain like that could pour so many gallons of water to where if you have a system set up to be able to gather all that water and then have to, obviously take care of that water to keep it clean because it'll get filled with algae and all this different stuff. But be able to have a system developed to be able to have that and then add that in will also help with dealing with our water conservation that we have going on here and wanting to do at least. So these are things that we're all working forward to.
And that's one of the biggest things, growing in a desert environment. Like I know one of our banana farm was mentioning he's growing in a drought, and you're basically in a constant drought. So let's talk about that water that you are using. You've
Mhm.
obviously, or I would assume you've had it tested.
Yep.
It's good water, but
Mhm.
how are you able to conserve it as much, or like, are you using, your gray water? Are you capturing
Mhm.
that, or anything like that on that side of it?
Yeah, well, so we recently had a little bit of an extension go on our property. We need to make sure because we have a small little manufactured home of like 2 bedroom, 2 bath.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe 1,200 square foot home that we live on and stuff, which is fine for us and stuff. But we also have kids and they're growing. My daughter just started high school and my son's in 5th grade and everything. So um, we've got a little prefab house that's right on the outside of there. And I was able to design a system to where the gray water, instead of it going to like the septic and stuff, actually just runs off into a leach line. And then there, we're going to be planting trees in the fall time that's going to be able to feed off that leach line, so I don't have to water those. And these are desert trees, like the
Yeah.
shoestring acacias and stuff that I've grown from seed, and I have them growing right now. I just got to wait until the fall time happens, and I can plant them in there, and I won't have to water those things because the roots would tap in to that gray water and to be able to actually start using that as a natural source. So anytime the kids take a shower or use the sink or anything like that, it's already watering them that way. So, different techniques like that is a big deal on being able to use the gray water for watering certain stuff. But as far as watering our crops or anything, I don't know what kind of shampoo the kids are using. I don't know what kind of, like things
Yeah.
like that they could be added in that could be not good for the plants that are feeding you. So we definitely have to rely on our well water and stuff, and using things like drip lines and just conservatively using them at the right appropriate time, such as
Yeah.
afternoons, early mornings, is everything. Because if you start watering during the day when it's 100 degrees, because you realize, oh, I should have watered this morning, but I thought everything was fine, but now it's drying out really fast, you're going to use at least 2 to 3 times the amount of water that you would use on the appropriate times.
Yeah.
So,
And that's something that the people really need to understand is timing when you're watering, plays a huge part. And that
yeah.
doesn't, necessarily just apply in a desert environment. It can,
Mhm.
Hawaii is the same way, because all of a sudden you're overwatering, there's too much moisture. So this is something that everybody really needs to consider, is the timing of when they're watering. And like you said, you're using drip lines. You're not using these, sprayers that are going,
Mhm.
putting the water in the atmosphere, which can be sucked up very quickly. You're putting
Very.
it on the ground. And I know you're using a mulch, because that's one of the products you sell,
Mhm.
is your Bokashi
Mhm.
mulch and your hemp kashi,
Yeah.
etc. on your website. And I'm gonna, for guys that don't know, uh, you can go to Water Rock Farms. They don't
Mhm.
just sell CBD products, but they're also selling, products for the hemp kashi and
Mhm.
biochar, etc. And those are things that we really need to show people. But you sent me some pictures, and I got them up here. Um, so what
Awesome.
the heck are you doing here? Are you drilling a hole?
Yeah, I'm just drilling away in all the rocks that we're growing in. So under
Yep.
there, under under that weed bearer, we actually have some compost that we laid down. Believe it or not, even though it looks like just rocks and dust is flying out of that hole, there is a layer of compost that we did. A way that we use for water conservation is that we'll just only compost and focus on a certain row of maybe about 6 feet wide or so, 4 to 6 feet wide, and just focus
Mm-hmm.
on composting that area and then leaving a blank side of just the natural soil or rocks or whatever that we have growing there, and then doing another row that way. So then we just focus on where the plants are going to be going. So after we drill that hole, I don't have any pictures of it, but I actually put mitigations inside that hole before we put the plant inside there, and then that barrier there, that agriculture barrier, actually helps to retain the moisture on top of the mulch that we already put inside there. The from our goat bedding manure to the mulches from local tree sources, all laid out there. Which I think there's a picture somewhere in there about that. This is kind of starting in the middle of it, but And then we'll just, put the holes there. But yeah, you see in this picture here, there's a, you can see the coloring difference. The coloring difference there is literally, that's our compost right there. That's a mixture between the goat manure and also the tree, mulch that we have and stuff like that. And we just went through with our little skid steer and dumped it in rows as evenly as possible, kind of graded it out. And all that dry stuff there is a cover crop that we grew a year before. And so that's all carbon and good stuff. And so there is roots, and believe it or not, there's soil inside all those rocks. And also good carbon from that cover crop that grew. And from that growing, it also made carbon into the soil because there's a good biomass of grasses and stuff like that too. So it feeds the soil down below and on the top and everything. And you can see our little mini skid steer that we use there, a little skid steer from China. I got that was still cheaper than having to buy a whole new tractor or even a used tractor nonetheless.
Yeah.
And it's been working pretty well for me. And we just took it and just kind of shake it and back up and make that row of manure and stuff there over top of the dead cover crop there and stuff. So then that's all the rich soil there. So we have a nice barrier there. And then putting that the weed barrier, which is a big deal, actually helps to keep that moisture in there. So then when we're watering with drip lines on the top of that, it's permeable enough to be able to allow the water to still drizzle down into that, and then keeps that moisture inside there too. But also permeable enough to allow air to flow through there, so we're not suffocating any microbes or anything like that.
Now, are you finding because it's a black cloth that you're getting extra heat down there? Are you cooking the biology? That'd be a question, a lot of people would want an answer to.
Yeah, absolutely. There is enough rocks. Like you see all the rocks that are there and stuff to where there's a space gap of air that's in between there. Because that was my greatest fear. Is the last thing I want to do is roast the roots of the plant and also kill off the biology that's already going on there that we have from all the soil and stuff. So yeah, that's a great question. But you can see how tightly we have it stretched. The rocks there actually kind of keep it just enough to where that heat is actually buried by a air gap in between there. So when the wind blows and stuff, there's enough air that actually still flows in there. And the plants seem to be doing fine, and as well as the biology. I had a tarp from the wind kind of blow and peel over before, and I saw inside there, and moisture is all good. Life is great on there. So, and the moisture is being retained as well. So yeah, this is our first year doing the outdoor field that way. And that was my greatest fear right there. What I'm doing here is I'm using this propane tank, and I have like a torch there, and I just kind of light that torch, and then I just slightly touch just enough where there's no like smoke or anything, but just enough to melt those holes that are in the back there. And then I'll take my drill, and then like that picture you saw earlier, I drill the hole out, and then it'll kind of kick up some dirt and then lay down a little bit to keep that weed barrier down, but also still enough gappage to be able to keep it to where we're not worried about it really heating up too much to be hitting the biology or anything like that. But I think next year, even just to make sure furtherly, we probably put a little bit of like a barrier of mulch over the top. I am working on getting a same type of tarp that's actually more biodegradable, because I don't like the use of plastic. I really want to turn away from that. So I've been doing a lot of research, and I found out that there really wasn't much plastic that was biodegradable, that was woven. All the ones that are literally suffocating plastics that are just a solid sheet that go over the top. So I decided to start doing as much research as I can. I found a few people or a few companies that actually have a biodegradable additive they can add into a polypropylene to actually make it truly biodegradable, where it'll break down into water, CO2, and biomass for the soil, which is perfect. So we're customizing something, and this is going to be a pretty big thing here. We're customizing a woven, permeable cloth that could go over the top that could actually start breaking down eco-friendly, which is ASTM 6954 certified, which all those numbers mean something in the letters. It means that like there's 3 tiers that exist that actually show and they're proven to break down into the soil correctly. Because a lot of these people that would just be like, oh, our stuff is biodegradable. Like in a place where I even got my stuff, I thought it would said biodegradable and stuff on there. But then I started to research it, what they meant by biodegradable was that it was OXO fragmentation. What OXO fragmentation means, it just breaks down into microplastics. So that means those microplastics still stick in your soil. So that's not truly biodegradable. But
Yeah.
what we're working on and what we're coming on, we're about to have this, we're going to be having this launched actually by the end of this year, is a shade cloth, or a soil bearing cloth that's actually going to be biodegradable and break down those plastics, so you won't have any traces of microplastics. And so we're excited about being able to use that by next year for our crop and stuff, because that's a big thing. We want to make sure we don't want to have that so much, plastics and stuff, and reducing that amount is a big deal too.
Well, yeah, and those microplastics are going into your plants that you're producing your CBD tinctures and oils from. Now, have you ever seen the cotton test, the underwear test for gardening?
No, I haven't. Fill me in on that.
Well, what people are testing how biologically active their soils are, and they're taking cotton underwear and they're putting it into the ground in their rows, then coming back a month or so later, digging it up to see if the biology has eaten it or not. And if it's been eaten, then of course you have a biologically healthy, active soil. And if it's not, you obviously don't. So is maybe that's something that you can consider as well, is if anybody's making a cotton fabric, because then it is organic, natural fibers that will break down, right?
Yeah. So one of our other things that we were looking into, which was still a little like the biggest thing that comes down to for a farmer, especially when they're doing acres. I mean, I'm a small farm, I could probably do cotton on the ground and all that stuff too, is cost. And one of the cheaper things to be able to use was jute, and having a really tight woven jute that actually goes down. And it'll do the same concept. It only lasts you maybe about a year, but also we have so much sun here too. So there is going to be a problem with UV resistance. There's a lot of UV treatments that actually are okay for the soil and can be used that way. And but then there's also ones that are bad for the soil. So being able to identify and find the right type of additives that are going to be soil friendly, because even with the colorant and all that stuff, it's got to be soil safe and soil friendly, so it's not poisoning the ground. And so that's the biggest thing that we're also doing, and making sure that we're sourcing these correctly. And we are on the cusp of being able to invent something new that just hasn't been invented or made for the agriculture industry. And but yeah, jute, I would love to use. I could probably use it for my high tunnel rise system, but out there in the sun, that stuff would get so brittle and break up that it wouldn't be of use. And it's also at least 3 times the cost of what the polypropylene is and stuff. So that was a big thing. But through the research I've been doing, I mean, I've been looking into this for years and stuff. I've actually found now a type of additive that actually would break down the polypropylene and stuff. And so we're excited to be able to get that in there and get that all patented up and start introducing it to everybody out there in the farmer that wants to farm the same way.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a couple of questions I want to bring up here. Should plant staggering the inner rows to prevent water erosion? Like, are you looking at that?
So the plants, some of the water will go off to the side, and so some of the natural plants will start kind of growing on the side that are already there. It could be weeds or whatever. I'm totally fine with that, as long as they're not affecting the actual growth spot of the plant. And that's what we really want to make sure that we preserve right there. I like the idea of being able to have less disturbed soil that's natural on the sides, growing up with the ones that we're actually growing in on. So I wanted to be able to, have natural plants that are growing on the side that are desert friendly and like already here with the seeds and whatever's going to pop up there. That's fine. That's cool. It's more ground coverage, more soil, more water retention in that way. We last year, before we started to use the weed barrier, actually, we used a lot of the natural grasses and also grasses that we added into that, and grew with the plants that way. They even held on to the water drip lines and stuff. So when wind came, the grasses would be holding those things, and it shaded them too. So then it also kept them, the water retained. But they also drink water as well, and they also any sort of stuff that you're using, like your compost teas or your fermented plant extractions and stuff, makes those things grow really good and vigors them up just as much as you're trying to vigor up your own plants. So what happens is you end up having a root system down underneath the ground that's now competing with your hemp and then or your cash crop in general. And so then your plants can't grow that big because they're all smothered from these grasses that has been actually, suffocating them and stuff. So the whole reason why we're starting to use a weed barrier is to be able to help it to where we're not going to have so much competition for the hemp to be able to grow. And we're going to give the hemp its full ability to actually grow at its fullest as if it has no competition. So,
well, and the thing about competition is, you only have so much water in your environment that, you
that's
can
right.
put out. So you want to have the natural, environment producing more water. Now, you mentioned you're growing native trees. Are you going to plant them like as a windrow, or are you putting in patches, or what's your thoughts on, creating those wind breaks, etc., so that the wind doesn't come in to suck your moisture out?
Yeah, actually, we're working on that's part of our NRCS plan that we just started. We just got done doing a 5-year plan with them. We've been doing cover crops and stuff. I was like, well, I'm going to be doing this stuff anyway. Might as well to get a little something for doing what I'm doing as well, and also have the science on our side to where these people are coming out and documenting all this stuff too. And we're working right now with the NRCS to be able to build these windrows. According to my contract with them, I was supposed to have that windrow already done, but I talked to them. I told them, like, look, I'm growing these from seed. I have a desert willow, I have a desert mesquite that we have out here, and I want to and also the acacias and stuff like that I got all grown from seed, and I want to make sure we're not planting them like in the summertime because they're just going to fry because of the shock.
Yeah.
And so they were able to rotate and make sure that we were just going to put in this new contract. So then we have that going off here. So this year in the fall time, I'm going to be planting that windrow that you're speaking of. That's going to be going over there, and we have those 3 varieties of trees inside there, as well as some others like like pomegranates. Got to have the pomegranates and everything like that, and like some other type of bushes too that are natural to this area, such as like we have a desert sage out here. That's pretty cool. It kind of grows wild. And we also have creosote. The creosotes are pretty cool. They're everywhere around here too. So allowing those to kind of grow and just kind of have those as the bushes, and then our mesquite and the desert willows and stuff and acacias is like the main trees that kind of go over dominant. We'll be able to help to make and fill in and make a good wind barrier. So then we don't have so much wind coming in off there and causing erosion and things like that too. So those are the big things. I want to be able to incorporate them also into some of the rows that we have, like maybe down the middle, but also the rows where we're just taking care of, and then the rows that are not taken care of and just having like desert stuff grow there, allow me to actually be able to easily go through and like spray like a treatment of like compost tea on the leaves or some sort of like foliar spray on the plants and stuff really easily when I driving the quad or backpack it up and stuff. Because if they're too close together, then it's hard to get into those things, and you constantly have to fill up your backpack and stuff. So we're taking away from how much we're actually being able to grow for quality, and we're just trying to focus more on that, and then also being able to support the natural desert plants. We're hoping by not disturbing the ground rows that exist within there about equally to what we have as hemp growing there is going to actually help to support natural ecosystems and make it to where we're not having to disturb already what's there, but just adding to it what we want. So,
well, and you're going to be promoting wildlife coming in, the small arthropods right up into your rabbits, etc., and the larger biology. And I think that is going to add the diversity. And people don't think that bees that come by actually secrete things as well, all the birds, and they're producing their own moisture. So it's very important to try to have that entire ecosystem on your farm, and that's what you're doing now.
Yes.
In the background of a lot of your images, you have some mountains in the background. Do you have much of an elevation change on your property?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we're only doing a half acre, and then it's a half acre that's kind of actually decreasing in elevation, and that helps with the drip lines. So then I'm able to actually just turn on the water. I have the drip line set up to where it's like every quarter acre is able to like feed in its own. Because we're doing the side that actually decreases in elevation, it's like about 150 feet long, 150 to 160, and it actually decreases. So the amount of water that I need as far as water pressure goes to be able to power the drip lines is actually a lot less. So I'm able to actually water a whole half acre off of a faucet spigot that starts originally from a 3/4 inch pipe. So
Nice.
that's pretty significant, and the amount of that goes. I have a bladder on my well and stuff, but it's not putting out a whole lot of pressure that would actually be able to do that, because these drip lines are actually made to where they can be controlled on very low amounts of pressure. And so because it's feeding out that way though, and it's going down, it's actually making it to where I don't have to use as much, water flow. So it's just a 3/4 inch, with the pressure. I didn't test the actual pressure on the lines, which is something I should be doing, but it was just more from experience, and then like putting it together, and then like we'll see if it works. And if it doesn't, then I'll adjust and do the science behind it. But then all of a sudden, if it works, then it's like, well, okay, we're good then. Luckily that's what it's been a little bit, so we're all right, in that way. Sometimes it's just like, the science is one thing, and to figure out the numbers, it's another, and then all of a sudden. But to just do it and just try it, and then trial and error and just see what happens, it's a whole nother thing. And that's really what a farmer does. It's just like you have to kind of go off of an intuition that's not fully explained by science as of yet until after you start doing. And then once you start doing, then you're like, okay, well, it works because of this science, and that's how it ends up working. Like your hands themselves could teach you a lot more, to your brain than what you would think. So,
well, and it's very important to be able to look at your property. That's the way they say when you're buying a new property, live on it for a year, go through all the seasons to really understand the property, the hydrology, etc. of how your property works. Now, are you planting, or are you digging like the holes for collecting water? Like you're saying like you've only had one little sprinkle of rain this year, but are you looking at ways to capture that water? Is that something that's in your 5-year plan?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So I accidentally did that before I knew anything really too much. I mean, again, every year we're learning, out here on the farm and stuff. The first year that I grew, I just went through and I drilled a whole bunch of holes with like a skid steer, and I just knocked out hole after hole. I had probably about 1,500 holes and stuff. And I didn't use like any of the tarps or anything like that on there. And there was a way less ground disturbance than I ever did before. And that was actually the best year that we had, because we were able to, the water was literally being encapsulated, and there were bigger holes than what I'm doing now. But there was like, still like grasses and weeds and stuff that would pop up and everything. But the grasses and weeds were a lot more friendly than what it is now, because I made the mistake. I didn't know better enough to not disturb the ground. I wasn't educated enough during these years to where I try to do it the typical ag way of just going out there and scraping and tilling up the soil and then making these rows and all that stuff, and then we had a less percent of a yield. And if I just stuck with just those holes, even during the time when it rained, the hemp plants that got, seeded slightly or something, they would drop the seeds, and then they would just start popping up like early as in March, and then just start kind of flowering. So I had a bunch of plants growing everywhere naturally without even our drip system intact. And that was the earlier times, the earlier year and stuff, before we started to get as much as a drought that we are in now. Where we actually got rain during the time, like, March and April and all that stuff, but this year we just didn't get that rain or anything, but those holes did make a huge difference. And then I'm kind of regretting filling those holes, because those holes were a big, huge deal on capturing that moisture. So being able to kind of smother out the weeds that came back that are pissed off right now using the tarp and the weed bearer right now, it's kind of like a big step. And then going eventually back to where I don't need the weed bearer anymore, and we just drill bigger holes and then have the plants go inside them and go back to what we originally did to begin with, which is my farmer's almanac. And the only reason I switched off of that is because I was seeing the way other people were doing stuff and I was trying to copy that, but not understanding that, like, look, this is the way the land is and it needs to be. So less ground disturbance, less all that stuff, and just only putting in the holes of where the plants are going to go, feed some of that native soil there. So then the roots could just extend out of that. So then the hole would be like a pot for your plant, put a little like compost inside there, and then allow that to be like a harboring zone for like, nutrient dense stuff, but then allowing where the roots could just broaden out in that hole and go wherever they want to go. Because once they get a taste of the natural, at least of like 10% of the natural soil there, then they're able to actually start figure out and see that there's nutrients in the natural soil and start going out there. So trying to get back to where we were before is like the key thing. And it's just kind of funny because like I had it figured out, but because of like these typical ways of agriculture made me feel that I wasn't doing it right,
Yeah.
And so I had to go through that whole like waking up spot because I tilled the ground, like a few years back and stuff, and the whole thing, and it was hard, and it was extra money, extra effort, extra work that I didn't have to do. Because once you have these holes and they're drilled out and they're nutrient dense from composting them, they're all good to go. You don't have to do that again. And I just set myself backwards, but this is agriculture. This is the part of being a farmer, is seeing what works. And the biggest thing that we walk away with is that we know now why we just do what we did to begin with in the first part. So we're trying to still find that fine line between it all, but it's definitely coming together, and we are understanding the right diameter of the holes to be able to put in, and compost in that spot there to where the roots could still go out. And now that we actually learn the whole more about regenerative ag systems and how those actually work, we're very excited to be able to make and increase our percent yield as what a farmer wants to do, and be able to share that with other farmers too and stuff. So
yeah, and I know like in some of the other shows that we've done, we've shown you drilling deeper holes, and you're putting in your hemp kashi, etc. in that. Are you still doing that, or is that in that hole you're putting your plant in? Are you drilling it deep enough to put that in, letting it compost itself for 30 days before you put your plant in? Or how explain what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so we're drilling the holes out, and we're going pretty dang deep, as much as we can, before the drill can't go any deeper and stuff like that. Right now, we just have it like it's manually drilling, so we don't have like a bigger enough equipment that's actually like hitting them as deep as we did originally, which we'll start getting back to once we start kind of critiquing some stuff. But this year was more of a learning process to see off of a 4 to 6 inch hole, even like based into the high tunnel rise system that we did, seemed really effective and stuff, and we're doing that same concept out in the field, and then putting the hemp kashi in, the hemp char and all that stuff inside that hole, and then planting it directly into there. So then it has a good power source to be able to help those plants grow, which we pretty much just nailed this year. However, we started a little bit late in the season, again, growing family, and so the heat started to come in, and so now the plants are kind of like, oh man, it's hot, and some of them are going to shock, and then some of them are actually starting to flourish, though, the treatments that we've been using and everything too is really helping. But again, it's triple digit heat here, and like, we have a lot of like, heat that's coming in. So we didn't get the full test of what we really wanted to accomplish this year, but this season's not over yet, and we still got the rest of this month. We got next month, and into October before harvest comes around, to where at the end of October to like early November and stuff actually starts hitting and stuff, and we'll see where we're at. It's kind of still like I get sometimes a little I guess disconcerted or discouraged a lot of times. Like it happens every year. I go out there and I just see stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, we should have done this. I know I should have done that differently. Why didn't I do this and all that stuff? And that's kind of the area that I'm at right now. But honestly, the truthful, every single year, I'm always doing that type of same thoughts and everything like that. And one thing from my grandpa that I learned the most, who was a wheat farmer, it was like, don't give up. Always just keep going. Like, it doesn't matter like how discouraged you are, just keep going. And that type of mentality has shown us to have good results at the end of the year. And we're like, oh, cool. Well, we do got something going on here. Wait a second. This plant's not dead. It's doing fine. It's actually producing and it's growing and, and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the stage we're at right now. We're getting hit with like a lot pretty hot degrees. It's 110 out right now and stuff. So, but we just got to keep going. We even had a big scare not too long ago where one day I didn't turn on my automated water system because I switched it over to the hose, and then they feed off the line and stuff. So I didn't switch it back to the automated system to be able to water my starters for my hemp. And I went out there the next day, and I swear everything was dead. I had probably maybe about a third of the plants that I planted, which will only be able to do maybe a half of the quarter acre. And I was like, no, we have 2 quarter acres, so we have a half acre that we're growing. And I was just destroyed by it. I was like, oh my gosh. And all I wanted to do is break something. But then there's a little voice in my head, like, it's fine, whatever it is, we're gonna be able to deal with, we're gonna be fine with. We just gotta get this thing. So I'm sitting here watering these dead plants. Just something's gotta happen. And stuff. And then a couple hours later, I mean, like I've seen flagging plants before. I've helped out a lot with local growers around here, people in the cannabis industry, and like I've seen plants that are just flagging. And these things were like beyond that. They were like dead. And then I kept watering them and everything. And I did these treatments on them beforehand, with our Buskler mycorrhizal fungi, making sure that they'd be able to have these heat tolerant, drought tolerant, traits inside of them and stuff. And they popped back, and they did. And I was shocked. Like, we still had extra even after planting out the field and everything. I did not expect that at all. So, you got to have the determination, and you got to keep going sometimes, man. It's really important. Don't get destroyed by things that you think might be real when it's there right in front of your face that these plants are dead and dying. All of a sudden, they might just pop right back up,
Well, you have to consider, if you look at hydroponics and the way hydroponics is done with the salts, they're actually killing their plant and all the biology in their plant when they feed them, and they actually stall their plant for hours or a day before the plants have enough biology to start functioning again. They don't realize they're doing that, but biology can like you said, that you thought they were all dead, yet all of a sudden they came back. The biology went dormant, and then it's coming back. So that's a beautiful story for people to grasp, that your plant may look dead, but it's just the condition of the plant at that moment. And don't overwater again, but steadily bring it back to the biology, back to life, and the biology will start reproducing cells again. Now, we did have another question on soil tests. What's the soil test results? Is that soil lacking in silica? You're growing in a desert with lots of sand. Is it a silica-based sand?
Actually, so in our high tonal rice system, we got it tested just this last year, and the silica was good and moderate. But we also been doing our regenerative ag system practices that we have. Right. So we've been growing the cover crop, and then also putting down our layers of hemp kashi, hemp char, and then also compost from our goats and stuff. And everything was actually really high on our last test that we did, which is perfect because that shows our system's working. The original one that we did before, back in like 2018, which is the soil that's out there, really didn't have much of anything. It wasn't bad soil, but it wasn't good soil either. And that was after we sifted out a lot of the rock stuff too, And so even if it is moderate soil within those rocks, it still has to go around those rocks and everything like that. So we had to develop a system that we are still in the process of making. Again, this is regenerative ag. Every year is going to get better and better. But we had to develop a system of certain microbes that could actually break up some of the rocks and use what we had was a high phosphorus. We actually had high phosphorus inside of the soil. And the silica, as far as that goes, I know we have some of the silica in the water, that the waters that we have here might be a little high in saline, but it also had silica and all those different type of things in there. Also, the fermented plant extracts that we do during the springtime, we have what's called wild mustard, and also a wild dandelion. I think it's like considered as a wild lettuce or something like that too. And we make a fermented plant extract out of those. Now, if you look at what kind of micronutrients those plants have, is silica is one of the big ones inside there. And they have that type of stuff. So we're feeding them that silica. So they have that type of stuff. And all the micronutrients, that's why I love fermented plant extracts, is because they have the things, and the weeds will tell you what you need, especially during the times when the desert is at its prime, which is usually around that springtime, and the weeds that start popping up there, they're all like these edible things. Like I could eat the wild mustard, I could eat that wild lettuce or dandelion or whatever it is, and be totally fine and sustainable off of that, as a first thing to kind of go into after a winter. And so can the plants. The plants can eat that too. And they have stuff that it needs to be able to help fix the soil, because they're pulling those up from the roots that are going deep and putting them up to the surface and stuff. So when you're pulling those out and you're making a fermented plant extract out of those things and then feeding that back into your soil, you're making sure that you're high on these micronutrients, such as silica, to be able to feed to your plants and everything, which I still have that dandelion extract that I'm still feeding to the plants, and then we're all the way into, August right now. So yeah. It's a big thing on that stuff. So I think our as far as our silica goes, I haven't tested it out in the field, but I know that we are in a moderate to a good amount in our high tonal rice system.
Yeah. Well, and it's the feed plants because the rocks and your sand silt clay has already been broken down to the size where it can be used in a new cell. And that's one of the keys to it. It takes a long time to take a rock and break it down into sand, silt, and clay, and then be able to use it at those smaller molecular sizes to grow cells. And that's where foliars, are so important, because you're adding those, molecules at a size that are instantly available to the biology to build your new cells. Now, you're doing the foliars. Are you doing much for a soil drench through your drip line in a biological focus?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I'm sorry for the confusion. Actually, that's the biggest thing we do, is actually doing the soil drenching, and all the fermented plant extracts that we use. We're actually doing more of soil drenchings, and then also our compost teas. So we'll be switching off between doing the fermented plant extract, using microbial inoculants, and then like fermented microbial inoculants from the plants, and then also switching off and using a compost tea that we have, because we have a little bit of a worm farm going over here with some red wigglers and stuff that's outside. Cool. And we that's from like our kitchen scraps and stuff. So we'll grab that stuff. It's really rich. I'm surprised how fast these worms took off this year. It's pretty awesome. They're loving that. And it has all the egg shells from all the eggs that we have from our chickens and everything inside there too, which adds a good source of calcium, especially after being digested inside the worm system and all that. And then taking that and then making a good compost tea out of it is a big deal. And we feed that in. It's mostly soil drenches. We do also do like foliar sprays and stuff too. But besides just having those two systems of the fermented plant extracts and the compost tea, we boost them up with other types of additives of like humic acid, fulvic acid, different types of aminos from like, fish mulch and stuff too. And also seaweed too, which seaweed you got to kind of watch out with, because it could be a little bit, salty and stuff with the way we have our stuff going with our high saline and stuff like that too. But it really does help. So a lot of these things, we kind of boost them up with those type of things, all organic, and just kind of help to enhance already what those teas and those extracts are going to be doing. And so that's how we're able to keep our greenhouse like as green as it is, besides, obviously our generic ag system naturally growing in that way and stuff too, introducing the right microbes. This year, I just wish I don't think I include that in the picture, but our greenhouse is actually it's super green. It's more green than it's ever been. And since last year to now, it's just beautiful. Like I didn't think I was going to be able to accomplish as good as it is. I knew I was going to be able to be the best grow that we had so far, but I really didn't think that it was going to be as green as it is now and stuff. And it's all because of those different diversities of nitrogen that are natural. I didn't have to use a drop of any sort of additive of, synthetic fertilizers at all. And it's just been straight from that stuff. And, we boosted up again, with the humic acid, fulvic acid, aminos, and CK. And then we also have a new addition that we're using because we have high phosphorus in our soil, but it's not plant available. So we looked into different type of things that could actually break down rocks more and to make that phosphorus more available to plants. We found out that was from trichoderma, believe it or not, and also a certain type of Bacillus subtilis, and then one other one. The type of trichodermas, because there is bad trichodermas, but the type of trichoderma we use is a Herasium and a Longi, and those actually work synergistically with our arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which also helps to break down phosphorus that's natural in soil to be able to make it available. So our step was, let's make sure that we have our arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi before we introduce anything else to it, get that established on the roots as seedlings when they're young, right when the roots start breaking up and start growing, get that AMF established immediately. 2 weeks later, then we start introducing it to the trichoderma. So then the trichoderma isn't competing against the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. It's going to be out there just mining away, kicking those rocks and other stuff out there to be able to break up and make sugars and, available phosphorus for the plants to be able to absorb through that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that pretty much takes any nutrients that's introduced to the plant and just makes it way more, like it increases its ability to absorb all that stuff. And it also creates water for the plants. And so it's another way that I'm pretty damn sure knowing that's why those plants survived when they were literally looking like they were dead. It's because that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and the other types of additives that we put into that soil to make sure they were able to bounce back. And because I swear, man, they were dead. They were dead. And they came back was because of what was happening inside the roots and the additives that we put in there, making sure that they were going to be able to be, living and stuff during these drought conditions and stuff. So we're training these plants. We're training the plants, generation after generation to be able to be not only heat tolerant, but also drought tolerant. It's the biggest thing. So then they'll just, get better and better each year. Because if we didn't do the training, the seed training that we've been doing, I don't think they would be alive, or even the treatments that we've been adding, they would have been dead. And that one day would have cost me the whole year,
Yeah. Well, and that's something, you move to a new environment, whether it's the desert or, Washington State or Hawaii, and you take a plant from, where you were, say, in the desert to Hawaii, it's going to take 3 to 5 generations of growing that plant, taking those seeds, replanting for it to make the change over to the new environment. And that's where you grow your own seed on your farm and you're introducing that environment. Now you're going to be planting trees, etc. You're going to be creating a whole bunch of different microclimates, which is fantastic. But I wanted to ask, how much clay, because I did a show last week on the show with Andy Lopez, Garden Santos story on sand, silt, and clay. How much clay do you actually have in your soil? And we know you got lots of sand, but how much clay do you have?
So as far as clay goes, our soil is pretty good that exists. Again, we're very rocky. Rocky has its benefits, but also hard on the machinery. But as far as clay goes, it's really not that much, not in our area. If you go about a mile down the road, that's where you're going to hit clay. They are more in the valley of our Pahrump location. It's literally it used to be a huge lake, just giant lake and stuff like that. So if you go down towards more of that area, that's when you start getting the clay. That's when you start getting the really not so loamy. Like our soil is considered more like loamy even. It's not too sandy. It's not too anything. The soil that exists after you sift out the rocks, it's decent. It's good. But the problem is it's just so many rocks, where it's gravel. it's almost like we got to build the soil up here because we have so much rocks, and we're just going to be growing like pretty much hydroponically if we don't. So as far as clay goes, we're definitely at a lower amount of that. But literally, if you just go right down the road, I would say probably even like a half a mile, just a little bit more in town, you hit clay, and you hit like this what do they call it, like poof dirt, which it will turn to poof dirt when it's dry, but then when we add water, it turns into this like slurry, really sticky stuff that literally would just suck any oils off of your skin immediately and stuff, and it's just like really suffocating stuff, and it needs a basis because it doesn't even have rocks or anything like that in there. So it's in our area, it's been, they have grown cotton overly abundantly amounts of cotton out in this area, which cotton sucks a bunch of water. And we're out here in the desert, and this place used to be, when the Indians were here, was this paradise for them. It was called Pahrump for a reason, which means water rock, and that's why we named our farm Water Rock Farming. Is because it represents where we're at and what the Indians usually used to call it, Pahrump and stuff. And they had springs everywhere, and then all of a sudden bad agriculture practices came in, and then they ended up just sucking all the springs dry because they're growing cotton. And then once they figured out how bad that was to do, they switched over to where overnight, really, that they had to start just growing alfalfa and cut the cotton stuff out because they were realizing they were blowing through water and just like taking away these springs that are natural here, even for the Indians and stuff now. And it's a sad thing, like they had it figured out. And then all of a sudden we came in with the westernized ways of farming and just pretty much not only poison the ground with like, glyphosate and stuff, trying to spray stuff to make sure the cotton will only grow and nothing else, but also just sucked so much water from the lands and stuff, when the lands were already abundantly, fruition or fruitful, so it's just,
you look at that one valley in California that sunk, I think 20 or so feet because they've sucked the aquifer out and the land is slowly dropping, and that's a lot of what, they did in your area is they, removed that water. Now, with your practices, my friend, you're putting water back into that. And you're going to notice a huge difference when you put up those trees and windrows and create those little shady spots. I think you're going to see a fantastic new amount of life coming back into your area. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I did want to get to this question from Chadwick. When do sugar leaves become bud producers in the flower stage? As soon as they form or after a certain week?
Okay, so as sugar leaves, we're talking about fan leaves, like the main leaves off of the plant. There's like what they call like fan leaves or water leaves that actually will like kind of feed. They're like they do use the whole photosynthesis. So I'm thinking that's what he's talking about because they use the whole photosynthesis and stuff. And photosynthesis is literally turning, sunlight and water into sugar for the plant. So I think that's what he's talking about. And once those things that we have here in the farm, once they start kind of like brittling up, they'll start kind of putting more energy towards the buds. I'd like to make sure that those things are just like kerneled and falling off. And then all the energy is going towards the buds. That's another big thing that makes us a little bit different than other farmers. A lot of times they will like keep those sugar leaves and keep feeding the plants a bunch of like nitrogens and, NPKs and all that stuff and keeping those sugar leaves alive because it looks so nice, But really, like that's not the process of what this plant's doing. You want to allow those sugar leaves to die off, and then you want the concentration to be able to go straight to the buds itself. And then we don't harvest until we start getting the cold weather. So if that cold weather comes way later, then that's when we're harvesting is way later. We have to wait for that sugar inside the plant to actually start changing. We want that, like the majority of the plants to start turning the fall colors. That's natural. Like what you got right behind you, Ken. Those colors that are right there, that's literally the colors and the shades that we want of the plants to be able to do. We want those sugar leaves to start turning that color and stuff because that's showing that there's cold air coming in there. And that literally does stuff to the cannabinoids inside the plants. and the sugars and everything like that. It helps it release what it's already naturally doing. And so we want to make sure that that type of stuff is already happening in the plant. And so a lot of farmers, they don't do that. They want just to be like, okay, it looks like the cannabinoids are right here, and that's what we're going to harvest right now. It's like, well, no, let's give it time. Let's let it sugarcoat and kind of turn that nice cinnamon color, and then we'll harvest, and stuff. And so timing's everything in this type of thing. And the way we do our timing's different than what the other people do and stuff. And I think that's what makes a difference with our products.
Well, and you're following the natural life cycle of a plant, right through. Like I'm only indoor, so I can control that, where I can keep those leaves green and lush, all the time, because I have enough water and enough moisture, etc. But in any environment, as that season progresses, things are going to follow the natural progression of how the biology is the natural progression of life and death in a plant. But
yes,
brother, we're at an hour, and I'm trying to keep these at a short, but we're definitely going to have you back on. You've got another month and a half or 2 months before your harvest. There's so much more to growing in a desert, guys, and Adam is doing a lot of those things and is showing them. So follow him on his website, his IG, his YouTube channel, etc. So you can keep up with what he's doing and why he's doing it. Find out what's working in that more desert-like environment for you guys that are in the desert. But Adam, thank you so much, brother, for coming on. And
it was
congratulations on the new daughter.
Nope, son. I know it's Emery, but it's a boy, Emery.
Okay, well, the wife's going to be coming after me with the frying pan, not after you.
Yeah, I was going to say, make sure you show her the picture, though. I know she's the one that I've been asking, so.
All right, guys. We're on with Andy. Hopefully he's feeling better tomorrow, and I'll find out later what our topic's going to be for tomorrow. But love you guys. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.